He laughed at her truth. He thought her words were nothing more than a child's fantasy, something to be dismissed with a smirk and a shake of the head. In that moment, he believed he was in control, that his authority as a mall cop was unshakable. But what he didn't realize was that justice had already stepped into the building. It was making its way toward him, steady and undeniable, wrapped not in loudness but in the calm, commanding presence of a woman who had spent her life delivering verdicts in courtrooms. This is the story of how arrogance tried to belittle a black girl's truth, and how dignity walked in to silence the laughter. The mall was buzzing that Saturday afternoon, its corridors alive with chatter, laughter, and the rhythmic footsteps of countless shoppers. Families carried shopping bags, children tugged at their parents' sleeves, and teens clustered around food court tables. Among this sea of people walked Maya, a 14-year-old black girl with bright eyes and a quiet grace. She wasn't extraordinary to those passing by, but within her heart lived lessons her mother had taught her every single day. Hold your head high, never shrink yourself to fit the ignorance of others, and remember your worth even when the world tries to strip it away. Maya carried a small purse tucked under her arm. She had saved up her allowance for weeks to buy a notebook she'd been dreaming of, one she wanted to fill with poems, drawings, and pieces of her own story. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a small act of independence, nothing more. But for Maya, life rarely unfolded without reminders of how the world saw her. As she moved toward the stationery store, a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "Hey you!" It cut through the noise of the crowd like a whip. Maya froze. Her pulse quickened as she turned toward the source. It was the mall security officer, a tall white man, broad-shouldered, leaning on the railing as if the mall belonged to him. He pushed himself upright and began walking toward her, boots striking the tiled floor with heavy, deliberate steps. The grin on his face wasn't friendly, it was mocking. "Where do you think you're going?" he asked, voice booming just loud enough for heads to turn. Maya blinked, startled. I'm going to the store," she replied, pointing to the stationery shop only a few feet away. But the officer wasn't listening to her words. He was feeding off the moment, off the eyes of strangers now watching. "Unhung," he said slowly, circling closer, his eyes scanning her as if she were a suspect rather than a child. "Funny thing, we've had shoplifters around here, and you look about the right age." The words stung like a slap. Maya's cheeks burned as whispers spread through the small crowd that had gathered. Some people looked on with pity, others with judgment, but no one stepped forward. She gripped her purse tighter, her throat tightening. "I didn't take anything," Maya said, her voice steady but small. The guard chuckled, tilting his head as if amused. "Sure you didn't, that's what they all say." He leaned in, lowering his voice but ensuring those nearby could still hear. "So, what are you really here for? Looking to cause trouble? Or just practicing for when you get older?" The implication twisted in Maya's stomach. She wanted to disappear, to shrink into herself. But she remembered her mother's words, "Do not let them decide who you are. Stand tall even when they try to make you small." Drawing a shaky breath, she lifted her chin. "My mum's coming to meet me," she said firmly. "She's a federal judge." For a split second, silence hung in the air. And then, the guard's laugh erupted, loud and sharp, bouncing off the walls. He threw his head back, mocking every syllable she had spoken. "A federal judge? Oh, that's rich. Sure she is. And I'm the president." The crowd chuckled uneasily, some shaking their heads, others avoiding Maya's gaze altogether. The humiliation burned deeper. Maya's eyes welled, but she refused to let the tears fall. She clenched her fists at her sides, willing herself to hold steady. The officer wasn't done. "You kids will say anything, won't you? Federal judge, huh? What's next? Your dad's the mayor." His laughter sliced through the air, cruel and dismissive. He saw her truth as a joke, and he wanted everyone else to laugh along with him. Maya wanted to scream, to shout that she wasn't lying, that her mother's robes carried more weight than this man's entire position. But she stayed silent, because another voice was about to answer for her. At the far end of the hall, heels clicked against the tile-measured.com, but carrying the kind of presence that made people turn their heads even before they saw her face. A woman in a crisp suit walked with purpose, her expression steady, her posture unshakable. The crowd parted instinctively, as though they already recognized something powerful in her stride. Maya's chest loosened. Her mother had arrived, and with her came justice, dressed not in anger, but in authority. The mall seemed to shift as Maya's mother walked in, her heels striking the floor with quiet certainty. She wasn't rushing, nor was she raising her voice, yet her presence carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to announce her authority. It traveled before her, a ripple that silenced the room long before she spoke a word. The guard, however, didn't notice at first. He was too caught up in his own performance, still smirking at Maya, as if he had successfully put her in her place. "Federal judge," he muttered with a laugh, shaking his head as though the very idea was absurd. But then the crowd shifted again, and his eyes followed. The laughter drained from his face as the woman approached, tall, elegant, her gaze steady as a hawk's. She didn't look around nervously as Maya had, didn't fidget or shrink under the stares of strangers. She looked directly at him, and in that instant, the smugness on his face faltered. "Mum," Maya breathed, her voice breaking slightly. Relief flooded her chest. Her mother stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, her touch both protective and reassuring. "Are you all right, Maya?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted sharply with the icy control in her eyes as she glanced up at the guard. Maya nodded quickly, though her eyes betrayed the sting of humiliation she had just endured. The judge turned fully to the officer now. "Would you care to explain to me," she said evenly, "why you felt the need to single out and humiliate my daughter in front of an entire crowd?" The guard straightened, his throat bobbing as he struggled to regain composure. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job. We've had issues with shoplifting, and I needed to be sure." Her hand rose slightly, cutting him off without effort. "You accused a child, my child, and when she told you who I was, you mocked her. You called her a liar." The man opened his mouth to protest, but the words caught in his throat. Around them, the crowd had grown silent, their eyes darting between the officer and the woman whose authority was now impossible to ignore. "Let me make something very clear," she continued, her tone unwavering. "My daughter's truth is not a joke. The way you treated her is not a mistake to be brushed aside. It is a reflection of how you see black children, not as young people deserving respect, but as suspects to be humiliated for your amusement." The words struck harder than any raised voice could have. Each syllable carried the weight of a gavel, falling one after another, final and indisputable. The guard's face flushed crimson. He shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the eyes upon him, the whispers circulating through the crowd. But Maya's mother wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her voice low yet cutting through the air like glass. "Do you know what happens when authority is abused? When those entrusted with safety use it to belittle instead of protect? It destroys trust, it breeds fear, and it teaches children like my daughter that their dignity is disposable." She paused, letting the silence settle around them. "I will not allow that lesson to stand." The guard stammered. "I didn't mean any harm. Intent does not erase impact," she said sharply, "and you will be held accountable for your actions today." Maya felt a surge of pride swell inside her. The tears that had threatened to fall moments earlier were gone, replaced by the steady warmth of her mother's strength. For so long she had carried the weight of being doubted, dismissed, made to feel invisible. But in that moment, she knew she was seen. Her mother turned briefly to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the onlookers who had watched in silence as the humiliation unfolded. "And to those of you who stood by and said nothing," she added, her voice still calm but tinged with sorrow, "understand this. Silence is not neutrality. It is complicity. When you watch injustice and remain quiet, you are giving it permission to grow." The words cut deeper than any accusation could. Some lowered their heads. Others shifted uneasily, confronted by the truth they had hoped to avoid. Finally, she turned back to Maya. "Come, sweetheart," she said gently. "We're leaving." But as they walked away, another officer, this one older, wearing the badge of a supervising manager, hurried toward them. His face was pale, his voice rushed with apology. "Judge Williams, I am so sorry. I had no idea." She stopped, raising a hand once more. "This isn't about me. This isn't about my title. It's about the fact that a black child cannot walk through a mall without being seen as a criminal first and a child second. If it takes my title to expose that, then so be it. But don't you dare reduce this to who I am. See it for what it is. Discrimination, plain and simple." The manager nodded quickly, shame flickering across his face. He promised an investigation, disciplinary action, anything to make the situation right. But Judge Williams knew the truth. Discipline might correct the man's career, but it would not erase the scar of the moment. For Maya, the sting of being mocked for speaking her truth would linger long after the crowd dispersed. And yet, beneath that scar, something stronger had been forged. As they walked toward the exit, Maya's mother leaned down and whispered, "Never let anyone's laughter silence your truth. Your voice is powerful, even when others refuse to hear it. And when you speak, speak knowing that dignity is on your side." Maya nodded, her eyes shining not with tears now, but with a quiet resolve. She glanced back once, seeing the guard standing stiffly as whispers swirled around him. His arrogance dissolved into something smaller, weaker. The world hadn't changed in that single moment. Racism hadn't vanished, nor had prejudice been erased. But Maya had learned that truth has a power arrogance cannot withstand. She had learned that justice, though sometimes delayed, does arrive, and when it does, it speaks with a force that cannot be mocked. That day, in a crowded mall where humiliation had seemed certain, Maya's truth had walked with her, and when justice finally arrived, it silenced the laughter that had tried to bury her dignity. For in the end, power built on cruelty crumbles, but truth, carried with courage, endures.